First of all, I would like to thank Adam and the organizers for inviting me. I was really so pleased and so honored and so grateful that you would allow me to come here and start this series of workshops. I think it's slightly sad that there are 2 workshops or 2 conferences in Europe this summer, one on formal approaches and one on cognitive and functional approaches. But that said, I'm really thrilled that there's now this series. And I managed to get both cognitive and functional into my title. And as you can see, I'm going to talk about 2 unrelated sign languages, and they are Danish Sign Language and Japanese Sign Language. I couldn't have done this work without the help of a lot of people. I'm not going to mention them here, but please take a look at the slide. Well, I have for some time been interested in finding out how signers express their uncertainty about what they are saying. When I, and probably also others, started looking at a sign language, we were very interested in how you express the basics, how you express who does what to whom. But once you know, I wouldn't say that we know that already, but once you know how people make a positive or a negative statement, then you would also like to know how they express their doubt, even when they make a positive or a negative statement. So my questions were, what are the resources that are recruited to express speaker uncertainty in sign languages? We know from spoken languages that words or morphemes with more concrete meanings are often used also to express epistemic modality. So do we find the same type of pathway from signs meaning having a concrete meaning like physical ability, speaking or obligation, to these more abstract meanings of uncertainty? And do 2 unrelated sign languages resemble each other more than they resemble the majority spoken languages with which they coexist? That is, do sign languages share something because of the way they are expressed that will make them different from spoken languages, even when they are not related? So here's an overview of my talk. I'll first say something about markers of epistemic modality in other sign languages. Then I'll say a little bit about the method that I've used, internal reconstruction. I'll present the data. And there were many ways that signers expressed their uncertainty in these data. But I'll focus on 2 areas. One of them is equivalence of "I think she left," where we have a first-person pronoun, a cognition verb, and a complement clause. And the other area is epistemic markers that come from interjections and tags. And then I will conclude. In other sign languages, at least in 6 other sign languages, it has been found that you can express uncertainty simply by means of non-manual markers. Even if there are signs that can be used for the purpose, you can also just use non-manual markers. In European languages, it has also been found that markers of permission or obligation can be used to express epistemic possibility, something like perhaps, or necessity, something like must. That's not generally found in sign languages. There are some exceptions, though. In Spanish Sign Language, a sign meaning must can be used in both ways. And in ASL, you can use can, should, and must in both ways. Then it has also been found that the palm up gesture can be used to express epistemic uncertainty. And it's mentioned for ASL that tags may be used to express speaker uncertainty. And these tags are transcribed as right and, I think it should be pronounced, I don't really know. But I don't know what the sign is. I have an idea that it is the palm up sign. Maybe somebody in here knows what.
It's this.
Oh, okay, so it's not the palm up sign. Thank you. It has also been shown that the pathways of these epistemic markers in other sign languages may be from a gesture, such as the gesture meaning strong, to a lexical item, for instance, the sign in Old French Sign Language and in Old ASL meaning strong, and then on to a grammatical item such as can, in the sense of able to, and finally to the use of this sign to mean possible. It can be done, or he can be there, or something. And it's a characteristic of diachronic development that there is a semantic change from an objective meaning, such as strong or able to a subjective meaning, such as possible. It's subjective because it expresses the speaker's view of things. And this semantic change may go hand in hand with a phonological reduction, where two-handed signs become one-handed and tense movements become reduplicated or lax movements. And let me give you an example from Italian Sign Language. In Italy, there is a gesture which accompanies speech acts and is used, for instance, for performing an oath. And if you take a look at the slide, you will see in the painting to the left St. John using this gesture in a painting by Da Vinci. The same gesture is also used in benedictions. When you trace a cross, it's used to bless the dead. And then it goes on to meaning physical, moral, or political death. And finally, despair or hopelessness. All this has been found for the gesture in Italian culture. The same hand form can be used in Italian Sign Language with one movement to mean dead, and with a different movement to mean impossible. That is, with the epistemic sense. So here we have this change again from a more concrete meaning to a more abstract or epistemic meaning. In Spanish Sign Language, A sign meaning must uses the, well, I'll just show you. I found it on the internet, and I hope this is the right form. It wasn't depicted in the paper. Is anyone in here? Does anyone know about signing? Thank you. So this is a one-handed sign, but there is a somewhat equivalent sign in a dictionary from the mid-19th century, which is two-handed. So here we see a phonological reduction. And the same hand form is said to be an emblem in Spanish culture used to express agreement. Moreover, in the dictionary from 1851, there's other signs with this movement, with this hand form, sorry. One of them means exact or just. And today there are signs in LSE meaning, with the same hand form, meaning same, invariable, sure, and assure. So here we see a similar development from gesture to two-handed lexical sign to one-handed epistemic marker within the semantic field covering necessary, agree, exact, same, sure, and must. And what is an internal reconstruction? Well, in the Spanish study, they didn't use internal reconstruction. They compared to a dictionary from the mid-19th century, a modern state to the state you find in an old dictionary. Internal reconstruction means that you look at the patterns of forms in one state of the language, and you find forms that have different functions. And based on that, you make a hypothesis about the pathways. The next talk today will be also using this internal reconstruction method. And now to my data. I used a closed corpus of data from Japanese Sign Language and Danish Sign Language. The data were collected by asking pairs of native signers to imagine that they were in a decrepit lifeboat in the middle of the Pacific. On board this lifeboat, there were 15 objects. And they had to throw them overboard because there was a risk of the boat going down. So they had to make a prioritized list of the objects in order of their importance for survival. This turned out to be a very, very good task, since people were really in doubt about what you can use, for instance, a mosquito net for in the middle of the Pacific. As you can see on the slide, there were 4 native signers of Japanese Sign Language and 8 native signers of Danish Sign Language. And I have transcribed about 40 minutes from each sign language. So this is really a very small corpus. And now first to the cognition verbs. And what I looked at here was the order of the matrix and the complement clause. And the matrix is what corresponds to I think in English. And the complement clause corresponds to she left. And as you can see from the table, please take a look at the table. it seems that the sign language, well, no, I'm pretty sure about this. The sign languages are the only languages that can use the matrix both before and after the complement clause in ordinary conversation. You may do that in, for instance, in spoken Danish, but that would be, the last part would be a sort of afterthought rather than really a matrix clause. Then it also turned out that the sign languages were the only languages that could use only a first-person pronoun with no cognition verb. And I'll give you an example of that. You should know that in Japanese Sign Language, you can point to your nose and mean I. And you can also point to your body the way we usually see it, but you can also point to your nose. And this is also found in general in Japanese culture, that you point to your nose when you mean I. But this is an example where the signer says it's difficult to drink being 80%. And then he uses this pronoun. I'm going to say this is slow motion, and I'm going to say the signs as he goes along, but please don't interpret that. I hope deaf people will be able to see it anyway. Okay. Drink, difficult, 80%, difficult, I. And I'll show it again. Oh, sorry. Going back, yes. Yes. I think these two features of the use of cognition verbs in the sign languages make them different from spoken languages. And I'm very, very curious about knowing whether this is what you find in other sign languages too. The construction where we see the matrix both before and after the complement clause is somewhat similar to constructions that we call verb sandwiches. And you just saw an example of that in the example where the signer used difficult both before and after 80%. I think also that the first person pronoun without a cognition verb plus a clause may be something unique to sign languages. And it's somewhat reminiscent of constructed action, where you can also just use a nominal before the construction, the constructed action construction. Okay, and then I would turn to epistemic markers that come from either lexical items or a gesture, are also used as interjections or tags and end up as markers of epistemic modality. And when I say interjection, I mean response word, but there's no proper linguistic term for that. I mean a word that you can use to say yes or no or I see. So it's really a word that you use when you react to what someone else says. And there are three lexical signs in Japanese Sign Language with objective meanings that are used in one-handed forms as response words, tags, and close internal markers of epistemic modality. And let me show you the, well, sorry, no, they mean sense, meaning, that was the first one, same, and different. And I'll show you all three of them. These three ones. And when the last two, the one meaning same, is used to respond, it means yes. It is simply the sign for yes. And when the one meaning different, when it is used to respond, it means no. And then the first one means something like I see, or that makes sense when somebody uses the first one as a response. And then they are used as tags and as clause internally to express a subjective meaning, an epistemic meaning. And I've translated all of them with may, but they may in fact be different, but it wasn't possible for me to get at differences in their meaning. So here's an example where the signer uses different in the one-handed version in the middle of the clause, and uses same at the end as a tag. And as you can see, he looks up when he uses the tag and has eye contact with his with the other person. And you should look at the person to the left, the man in the blue t-shirt. That one need not different, that one, yes. And I'll show it again. Yeah. In this next example, he uses sense in the middle of the clause to express epistemic uncertainty. And the example means there are oars. So thirdly, we may row the boat. And it looks like this. Row. Stay, third, do, sense, row, boat. Okay, I'll go back to, or come back to the examples and in the conclusion, but in Danish Sign Language, we use, or signers use the palm up gesture in a lot of different ways. And this palm up gesture has been documented as a co-speech gesture in Europe and North America. I think also New Zealand and Australia. It functions as a metaphorical way of giving, receiving, showing, asking for, begging, and presenting. And it has been studied, especially by Cornelia Müller, who says that it presents an abstract discursive object as an inspectable one, an object which is concrete, manipulable, and visible. And it invites participants to take on a shared perspective on this object. So what is important here, that there is both an aspect of evaluating the discourse content, which is the modal cognitive aspect, and there's an invitation to the addressee to join in that evaluation. And that's the interactional aspect of it. Palm up is known from several sign languages. I won't mention all of them here for lack of time, but it's almost not found in the data from Japanese Sign Language. Points are most frequent in conversations in Danish Sign Language, and the next sign is this palm up gesture. But in the data from Japanese Sign Language, I only found 2 examples, and they were both deictic. So they really pointed to something. I won't translate the next example. I'll just ask you to look at the example and see how much the woman to the left, the woman in the green cardigan, how much she uses this palm up. She's talking about fishing, and she's claiming that they can eat the fish raw like sushi. And there are 4 tokens of the palm up gesture in this sequence. 3 of them are tags. That was the one. No. Number 2. No, 4. Okay, so I hope you got an idea of the. Here, this man uses the same palm up gesture as a sort of carrier of the epistemic uncertainty, and he uses it with a first-person pronoun, so it works like, or it functions like a sort of proverb at the end of a very long sentence that means but given a distance of 2,000 kilometers in all directions. Whether the radio can connect, I don't know. There. I hope you got an idea. It was at the end, and it looks somewhat like this. Okay. So what we have seen here, that is a gesture in spoken languages, the palm up gesture, and it has been integrated into Danish Sign Language as a response word. I haven't shown you that, but it's also used to respond to what others say. As a tag and as a proverb with epistemic non-manual marking. He was shaking his head and looking skeptical. So what we see in both sign languages, or when we combine both sign languages, is that in Japanese Sign Language, you may start with a sign with an objective meaning, It can be used to respond to others, as a tag that invites a reaction from the other person, and as an epistemic marker or a carrier of epistemic meaning. And in Danish Sign Language, it starts with the palm up gesture, which may have an objective meaning, but also an interactional meaning. It can be used as a response, as a tag, and as an epistemic, a carrier of epistemic meaning. And let me remind you again of the Spanish sign meaning must, which comes from a gesture indicating agreement. So we see a stage between objective meaning and subjective epistemic meaning, which is interactional or intersubjective. And this goes against a claim made by Elisabeth Engberg-Pedersen based on spoken languages. She hypothesized a unidirectional change from objective to subjective to intersubjective meaning. But as a matter of fact, there are also cases in spoken languages where you go from intersubjective to subjective meaning. It has been found that tags in English, but also in North American Indian language, are used as tags are used to indicate reduced certainty. And this makes sense if you see a tag as a way of inviting the other person to take part in thinking about whether this could be true or not. And speakers of other Germanic languages than English know words that can be used for responses and as clause internal epistemic particles, or as a tag and clause internal epistemic particles. I mention here two words from Danish, spoken Danish, but German also has clear examples of that. So here, sign languages are not unique. This is a general feature in language. So to conclude, both sign languages use a construction reminiscent of constructed action. A first-person pronoun with no complement-taking verb followed by a clause. Moreover, both sign languages use a sandwich construction with the matrix both before and after the complement clause. And in both sign languages, we see how objective meaning can become intersubjective and then subjective meaning. That is also found in spoken languages. Moreover, we find that there may be a phonological reduction from a two-handed to a one-handed sign. That was seen especially in Japanese Sign Language. And I have written, we also see that in spoken languages. Of course, we don't see it with the hands, but we see other types of phonological reduction that go hand in hand with the semantic change. Thank you.